Today, we're really delving into a remarkable life, the life of Father Maximilian Kolbe. His story is this incredible weave of, deep spiritual conviction, but also, surprisingly, a very modern way of communicating, and ultimately this act of just profound, heroic sacrifice. The goal is really to pull out the essential story, but also maybe some surprising facts, about how he went from being this, curious young friar, even interested in science.
Right, that scientific angle is often overlooked.
To becoming a global missionary figure, and then, of course, a canonized saint whose impact is still very much felt.
And I think our mission is to get beyond just listing his achievements, the what. We really want to understand the why. Why do his ideas, his commitment, even that sort of entrepreneurial spirit he had with media, why does it all still resonate so strongly? It's this connection, isn't it? How this deep inner belief, this conviction, shaped absolutely everything he did practically, every decision, every project.
Okay, let's start there then. Unpacking the early Kolbe. You mentioned the science, his time studying in Rome, say, 1912 to 1919. Our sources point to him not just being spiritually focused. He had this real intellectual curiosity, physics, mathematics, or actual scientific writings.
Yes, incomplete, but they show a certain mindset.
So how did that blend, that intellect combined with this obvious personal dedication, how did that lay the groundwork for everything that followed?
It's absolutely crucial, I think. That period in Rome, it wasn't just about learning theology, it really forged him. The sources describe him as a committed and serene young man. And that rigor, that dedication you see in his approach to study, even potentially science, it becomes the bedrock for these incredibly ambitious projects later on. He had this analytical mind, an ability to see systems, to think logically. He didn't just leave that behind when he focused on spiritual things.
Right, he applied it.
Exactly, he applied it. It was about building something solid, something thought through, not just abstract ideas, but preparing for real practical action.
And this is where it gets really fascinating for me, where that intellectual rigor seems to pivot into a very specific spiritual framework. 1917, still in Rome, he founds the Militia of the Immaculata, the MI. What was the driving spiritual idea behind that? And how did it set him off on this very distinct path?
Okay, so the MI. The core, the absolute fundamental dimension was what he termed total consecration to the Immaculata. Now, consecration, for anyone maybe unfamiliar, it's not just saying a few prayers. It's this really deep, holistic act of giving yourself entirely, your mind, your will, your heart, everything.
To Mary.
To Mary, yes. Specifically, under her title, the Immaculata, the one conceived without sin. But, and this is key, not as an end in herself. Kolbe saw her as wholly relative to God. She was the most perfect instrument in God's hand because she was perfectly aligned with God's will.
So the idea is she leads you closer to God.
Precisely. Her entire focus in his theology is leading hearts to Jesus. His watchword captures it perfectly. Through the Immaculata to the heart of Jesus. He had this really profound idea that the Church's mission and our mission as individuals is to imitate Jesus by, as he put it, emptying ourselves in the womb of the same Mother Mary. This complete belonging to Mary, this total trust in her guidance, he saw that as the strength of the mission.
That's a very intense, very focused spirituality.
It is, and it immediately raises the question, doesn't it? How on earth do you take something that theologically deep, that intense, and translate it into practical action that can reach, potentially millions of people?
Which he absolutely set out to do. His methods for spreading the message were, as we said, surprisingly modern, particularly his use of media. So he returns to Poland, and he establishes Niepokalano, the city of the Immaculata. What was this place? It sounds more than just a monastery.
Oh, much more. Niepokalano was utterly unique. It was conceived as a Franciscan community, yes, but one designed specifically to be a living, breathing embodiment of that MI ideal. It ran on the strict principle of holy poverty, meaning they relied completely on divine providence for funds, for resources. Yet its stated focus was incredibly ambitious, the conquest of the whole world for the Immaculata.
Conquest, that sounds quite strong.
It does, but it was entirely spiritual. Conquest of hearts and minds for Christ through Mary. And what made it operationally unique was that it was powered almost entirely by the labor of religious brothers.
No paid staff.
No hired lay workers, imagine that. Eventually, hundreds, even over 1,000 friars, all living this consecrated life, but also printing, writing, building, farming, doing everything needed to run this massive operation.
A self-sustaining city, almost.
In a way, yes. A self-sustaining engine for evangelization, fueled by faith and the sheer dedication of these brothers. It was remarkably efficient, incredibly focused, and just breathtakingly ambitious.
It really sounded, and central to this was the publishing, right? Tell us about the Reisers Nipokalanij, the Knight of the Immaculata magazine, and his other media ventures. He seems almost like a media mogul in friar's robes.
He really does. He launched Reisers Nipokalanij, the monthly magazine, and right from the start, he wasn't thinking small. He apparently dreamed of a circulation of 500,000.
500,000 back then.
Yes. It sounds almost unbelievable. And he wasn't just thinking print. He explicitly wrote about wanting to use everything: art, literature, theater, cinema, books, journalism, radio, etc., all as tools for the gospel. He saw the potential of mass media way ahead of many others in the church.
What kind of content was in the Reisers?
A really wide range. Obviously, Marian themes, Franciscan spirituality, but also philosophy, dogmatic theology, moral questions, liturgical life. He aimed to educate and inspire on multiple levels.
It couldn't have been easy financially, though, especially operating on holy poverty.
Oh, the hurdles were immense. The sources detail a terrible shortage of paper at times, printing costs soaring, doubling overnight during strikes at one point, constant financial pressure. Yet somehow, through what seems like sheer determination, prayer, and an uncanny ability to inspire donations and attract dedicated volunteers, he kept going. He secured funds, expanded operations.
It wasn't just the one magazine, then?
No, Nipokalanij grew into a proper publishing house. They added Little Night for Children, a daily newspaper called Little Daily Imagine, friars putting out a daily paper.
A daily newspaper, run by friars.
Yes, and even a Latin quarterly aimed at clergy around the world, plus calendars, pamphlets. It was a huge operation. His vision for using communication technology was just extraordinary for the time.
But this level of activity, this constant drive, launching new projects, managing hundreds of people, the financial stress, it must have taken a physical toll. We know his health wasn't great.
That's one of the most striking and frankly quite moving parts of his story. His health was precarious. He suffered badly from tuberculosis, had significant lung damage. Doctors repeatedly told him he needed extensive rest. There was even a point where his religious superiors formally ordered him to step back from managing the MI purely for health reasons, to recover.
Did he listen?
Well, he tried, but his letters often reveal him admitting he was working over and above our forces. He knew the physical requirements he wrote about needing 10 hours sleep, fresh air, a dry place to live things utterly impossible given his workload and the conditions.
So there's this constant tension.
A profound tension, yes, between his physical frailty and this relentless spiritual drive, this sense of mission. It wasn't just willpower, though I'm sure that was part of it. It seems rooted in a deep belief that the mission itself, the work of the Immaculata, transcended his own personal well-being. He just had to keep going.
It really does make what he achieved even more astounding. And his vision wasn't just for Poland, was it? He had global ambitions. Tell us about the missionary work, particularly Japan.
Absolutely. His zeal wasn't contained by borders. In 1930, he lands in Nagasaki, Japan. Think about that leap, Poland to Japan in 1930.
Huge leap.
And within just a few months, he's starting to distribute Mugenzai no Seibo no Kishi, which is the Japanese version of the Knight of the Immaculata. He managed a print run of 10,000 copies fairly quickly.
How did he even manage that? Language barriers alone.
Immense challenges, cultural nuances, finding reliable translators, funding. It was incredibly difficult. But he was just relentless. There's a fascinating detail in one source. Apparently, the best person he found to translate the Knight into Japanese was actually a Japanese Protestant pastor.
Really?
Yes. And the source notes that through working closely with Kolbe in the material, this pastor later expressed a serious desire to convert to Catholicism. It just speaks volumes about Kolbe's personal impact and the power of the message, even across such divides.
And Japan wasn't the only place. He looked further afield, too.
He did. His ambition was truly global. In 1932, he traveled to India. He was actively exploring the possibility of setting up a third Nipokalanij there.
A third one, after Poland and Japan.
Yes. He met with an archbishop, he was scouting for land, trying to lay the groundwork for another mission hub. He really believed this model could work anywhere. There's a story from that India trip, actually. He recounted facing numerous setbacks, difficulties piling up. He prayed the rosary intensely, and apparently right afterwards, a rose fell from a statue of Saint Therese of Lisieux he was near. He certainly took it as one. He wrote that right after that, all the difficulties vanished quite unexpectedly, one after the other. It shows his deep reliance on prayer and his conviction that God, through Mary and the saints, was directly involved in the work, smoothing the path when needed.
It paints a picture of incredible faith and drive. But surely, this kind of grand vision, this rapid expansion, setting up new communities, potentially changing rules, It must have caused some ripples, maybe even friction, within his own Franciscan order.
Ripples is putting it mildly. Yes, he faced significant internal resistance. It wasn't all smooth sailing, even with his own brothers in faith.
What kind of resistance?
Well, his plans were radical in some ways. He wanted specialized training for the friars, working specifically for the MI, maybe even different vows, separate novitiates places for initial training. His superiors, right up to the Minister General, the head of the Franciscans worldwide, pushed back quite forcefully. Their main concern, it seems, was the unity of the order. They didn't want a sort of separate group forming within the Franciscans.
So a clash of visions, really.
A fundamental clash. It wasn't just bureaucratic hurdles. It was about the very identity and structure of the order. The sources even mention that there were friars not very favorable to his whole project.
Actively unfavorable.
It seems so. Some apparently distorted his plans when talking to others, which must have made his life incredibly difficult. Imagine trying to build this global network when some of your colleagues are actively undermining you or misrepresenting what you're trying to achieve.
That must have been deeply painful.
Undoubtedly. And he faced personal disappointments too. Friars he had brought to Japan deciding to leave, concerns he expressed about others losing their religious commitment, their calling. It wasn't easy managing people under such pressure.
How did he handle that kind of internal opposition and personal disappointment?
What's really fascinating is his response. He showed incredible humility, actually. He described himself in letters as a weak superior, saying he was maybe too soft with people.
He blamed himself.
To some extent, yes, in his personal reflections. But underlying it all was this unwavering conviction in what he called holy obedience. He truly believed that obeying his legitimate superiors, even when he disagreed or it hampered his plans, was the surest way to know and do God's will. He navigated these immense challenges through obedience, even when it cost him dearly. He seemed convinced that the Immaculata would achieve her aims through him, despite his own perceived weaknesses and the limitations imposed by others. There are moments in his writings where you see the struggle, the human doubt. He wrote once, "Oh, how often do I perceive I no longer have either faith or hope and do not even feel love? The devil insinuates the question, why did you come so far? You feel the weight of it."
The sheer honesty is remarkable.
It is, and yet he always came back to that trust, that obedience, that conviction that he was just an instrument.
It's an incredible picture of resilience. And all these principles he lived by, this total dedication, the obedience, the innovation, the sacrifice they were about to face, the ultimate test, weren't they? World War II changes everything.
It does. The story culminates in the horrific crucible of the war, where his life's philosophy was tested to the absolute limit.
Tell us about his actions then, during the war, leading up to that final defining moment.
When the war broke out in 1939, Nepomuceno, his beloved city of the Immaculata, immediately transformed. It became a sanctuary. Father Maximilian opened its doors and welcomed thousands of refugees pouring in from Western Poland, fleeing the German invasion. Importantly, this included many Jewish refugees.
He sheltered Jewish people, knowing the Nazi ideology.
Yes, thousands of refugees, including, the sources specify, many Jews. He provided shelter, food, whatever they could offer, right there in the friary. He chose to stay, to minister to the wounded, the displaced, fully aware of the immense danger he and the community were in.
But he couldn't avoid danger forever.
No. In February 1941, the Gestapo came for him. He was arrested and eventually sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp. Pauillac prison first, then Auschwitz. And it was there, in that abyss of suffering, dehumanization, and death, that his entire life found its ultimate expression.
The story of Franciscan Kolbe.
Yes, the infamous collective punishment. A prisoner escapes, so the camp authorities select 10 men at random to be starved to death in an underground bunker as a deterrent. One of the chosen men, Franciscan Kolbe, cried out in despair, "My wife, my children, what will they do?"
And Kolbe.
And Kolbe, prisoner 66670, stepped forward. Quietly, calmly, he stepped out of line, removed his cap, and stood before the commandant. He offered his life in place of Kolbe.
Just like that, offering himself.
Just like that. An act that reportedly stunned everyone, including the SS guards. They asked who he was. He identified himself as a Catholic priest. The exchange was permitted. He was led away with the other 9 to the starvation bunker. He died 2 weeks later, on August 14th, 1941. He was the last of the 10 alive, and they finally killed him with an injection of carbolic acid.
It's almost impossible to comprehend that level of sacrifice.
It truly is. But it wasn't, I think, a spontaneous out-of-the-blue decision. It was the ultimate logical culmination of everything he believed and lived. It was the most powerful reflection imaginable of his total consecration. He genuinely believed, according to those who knew him, that he had been led to Auschwitz by the Immaculata precisely for this purpose, to save souls, to be a light in a place plunged into utter darkness. His goal was to provide, in his words, a supreme and endless testimony of love. His whole life demonstrated his conviction that there is no love without sacrifice.
Like an imitation of Christ's sacrifice.
Exactly. It was the ultimate imitation of Christ's self-giving on the cross, fueled by his deep love for Jesus, expressed through his Marian devotion. Every innovation, every hardship, every prayer led to this final, complete gift of himself. He held nothing back.
So, standing back from this incredible life story, the innovation, the global vision, the internal struggles, the ultimate sacrifice, what does it all mean for us now? What's the lasting impact?
Well, the impact is multifaceted, isn't it? Theologically, his Marian insights were profound. They definitely influenced later church thinking, particularly regarding Mary's role in salvation history. You can see echoes of his thought, this idea of consecration as a path to Christ, in the teachings of popes like John Paul II, who canonized him, and even Benedict VI. They recognized the depth there.
And his patronage is interesting, too.
Very. He's a patron saint for such diverse groups, journalists, and those involved in communications because of his media work, families, perhaps linked to Gujonacek prisoners, obviously, the pro-life movement. It shows how his example touches many different areas of life.
So his life speaks beyond just the specifically religious context.
I think so.
Right.
It illustrates this idea of pursuing holiness not as some abstract, otherworldly thing, but as a dynamic, engaged process, a process of total dedication, total trust in God, even when facing immense suffering, internal doubts, external opposition. And that integration, the deep spirituality combined with very modern, practical action like the publishing empire, that's a really compelling model, isn't it? It shows how radical faith can fuel very tangible, impactful work in the world.
It really does feel like an aha moment looking at his life that way. You see how these core beliefs weren't just internal, they drove everything, the innovation, the community building, right through that final act in Auschwitz. It's a portrait of life lived with absolute purpose.
And perhaps his example pushes us, to think critically about our own lives. How do we translate our values, our deepest convictions, whatever they may be, into actual, tangible action? Especially today, in a world that's so noisy, so full of distractions and complex challenges, Kolbe reminds us that real impact often flows from that kind of unwavering dedication, even, or perhaps especially, when the path is incredibly difficult and demands everything we have.
Which leads to maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to take away from this deep dive into Kolbe's life. If one person grappled with such enormous difficulties, chronic illness, resistance from within his own beloved religious order, the unimaginable horrors of Auschwitz could achieve so much. If he could build a media network, inspire thousands, and ultimately make that supreme sacrifice, all driven by his striving for holy obedience and dedicating every talent to a higher purpose, what untapped potential might lie within our own daily commitments, within those small acts of perseverance when things get tough? How might we, in our own spheres, in our own ways, begin to translate our deepest values into meaningful, impactful action, just as Kolbe did, in his own unique and extraordinary way? Something to ponder, perhaps.